Okay, hello everybody. It's 2 o'clock. It's time for us to get started. I've really enjoyed hearing where everybody is from and counting all the places I've been and a few that I haven't but would love to visit. So we've got a wonderful representation across the US and a little bit around the globe. So welcome everybody. We're so delighted you're here. I'm Betsy Hill, president of BrainWare Learning Company. And again, welcome. Want to just cover a couple of housekeeping things as we're getting started. You can type questions in the chat window. Everybody seems to have found the chat window, and that is wonderful. We will be recording the session. I just remembered to push the record button, so we are recording it, and the recording will be available either later today or certainly by tomorrow, so that if you have colleagues who weren't able to attend or you want to review anything, you will have access to that, and you will get an email when that recording is available. The slides and handouts for today are available for you to download. If you go to the handouts tab, you'll find the slides and some other materials that we'll be working with. And the last housekeeping thing is that I know that many of you are educators, and if you would like a certificate of participation for professional development purposes, just type certificate in the chat window. And when we download all the lists and stuff later, we will make sure that we get certificates to those of you who want them. If you registered with a different email or a different name or something, then you want your certificate to appear in with at and for, just indicate that as well. But we will get those out. It sometimes takes us about a week, so don't panic if you don't get it right away. All right, so let's get going. Many years ago, after I had finished my MBA, I was in an interview for a job, and the president of the company I was interviewing with asked me whether I had done as well as I had in my MBA because of intelligence or because of hard work. And of course, I was ready to say, well, both, of course, but he interrupted and told me he knew it was both, but he wanted me to pick one. So I ended up answering that it was more because of intelligence, being smart, than hard work, because everyone in the program worked really, really hard, including me, but that my intelligence helped me to do work at a higher level. And I felt very embarrassed and uncomfortable saying that. I even feel that, I can even sense that feeling today. And that's because I had some fixed mindset ideas, including the idea that we are born more or less intelligent. And if I was intelligent, it was really my parents. It wasn't really something I should take credit for. That is, I might thank my parents for the DNA and my genes. And I didn't really, appreciate, and this is what we'll be talking about today, is how intelligence and skills and talents develop through our experiences. So while I am very grateful to my parents for many things, in this context, it was because they provided an environment in which intelligence and talent abilities could grow. And so I reflect back on that interview also, it seems to me that the question was really bespoke a fixed mindset, a lack of the understanding of the remarkable degree to which we can learn and grow and change our intelligence and our talents. So this is a little picture that will guide us along our tour today. Understanding and developing a growth mindset is not a linear path. And it has several factors that I think are really important. So we're going to address all three of these today. Mindset, of course, is how we think about change, how we think about our ability to grow and change and do things better. Cognition is an important part of it, refers to how we think, our intelligence, and how we change how we think and change our intelligence. And then metacognition refers to how we think about how we think. So lots of thinking and changing and thinking and changing going on here. And my goal is to have this all make sense before we finish up. So just briefly, the concept of fixed and growth mindset comes, of course, from the work of Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford. And there are a lot of videos of her discussing her work on YouTube, and I really recommend them. She does such a nice job of explaining what prompted all of this and how the research has carried forward. So we're not going to review her research today, but what we're really going to do is try to discuss how to put it into practice. But a little bit of review. Fixed mindset, of course, refers to someone who holds the view that talent are inborn traits. In order to be successful, you really have to have some natural talent for that. And that failure and mistakes are to be avoided. We never want to try something if we're going to make a mistake, because mistakes aren't good. A growth mindset looks at things rather differently. Intelligence and talent are developed. Mistakes are all about being able to learn from them. And you can't, in fact, be successful unless you are able to learn from your mistakes. The rainbow-colored bar at the bottom is to remind us that none of us has a pure growth mindset, and none of us has a pure fixed mindset. It is a continuum. And even more than that, we may have one kind of mindset in a particular context and a different mindset in another context. Furthermore, mindset isn't just about what we say. It really is about how we process feedback, how we interact with our students. You know, if asked in general, we all might say, well, yeah, of course I have a growth mindset. It's really critical for teachers and parents and virtually every profession I can think of. But how we really behave and what we say and what we believe at a non-conscious level can be very different. When you encounter someone with a fixed mindset, you are likely to hear them say things like, I just can't do this, or everyone else had an unfair advantage, or some other kind of excuse, or they might just avoid this thing altogether. Someone with a growth mindset might say something like, I can do this if I work at it, or I just haven't figured it out yet. I wonder how I can learn from this mistake. If someone feels like they're not very smart, they take for granted that they can't get any smarter, that others are smarter, and the gap is determinative. For those who think they're pretty smart, or who have been told they are, they think everything should come easily and to expect not to have to try very. In both cases, whether you're or not so smart or anywhere in between, because we know that can change, they typically start to embrace those situations as opportunities for change. The growth mindset uses or implies one of the most powerful words in the English language. And for those of you who speak other languages, your language has certainly has the equivalent. It's part of every human language, I believe. And that's the word yet. Yet contains within it the promise of accomplishments we can't yet imagine. It contains within it a vision of our future selves, doing exactly what we were just failing at, but doing it successfully. And it gives appropriate value to a mistake and to a learning experience. So if you take some of those fixed mindset statements and you add the word yet to them, it becomes a completely different proposition. I can't do it yet. I haven't figured out yet. The next key to growth mindset, as we'll see, it's not just about grit or persistence. It's about grit with a plan. It's about persistence with a strategy. What can I try next that can change the outcome? When we want to go about changing our mindset and helping others to develop a stronger growth mindset, one of the first things really is to look carefully at our own mindsets. You know, mistakes are tricky things. None of us wants to make a mistake. At least I don't in my work. And frankly, I just found a typo on the previous page. And I got a little mad at myself because I don't like to have mistakes. And I can't tell you how many times I've looked at that slide. But then I have a choice. I can stay mad or I can ask myself what to learn from it. But that's a pretty trivial example. So as I have gone through looking at my own mindset and looking at various areas of endeavor in my life, I started to find some really interesting things. I made some interesting observations. I have a very strong mindset when it comes to cooking. I love to cook. And I relish trying new things, new ingredients, new cooking techniques. The first meatloaf I ever made over 30 years ago was just about inedible. But today, I can make a great meatloaf. I have less of a growth mindset when it comes to sports. If I don't feel like I have some natural ability in a sport, I'm inclined to shut down or not try very hard or just say I can't do it, or I think I'll sit this one out. I used to have a somewhat mindset about teaching. When I first started teaching, I assumed I would be good because I knew my subject matter really well. It was foreign languages. If I knew then half of what I know today about how the brain learns, it would have been a very different experience. Today, I'm always working on how best to craft the experiences that I provide to my students to foster deep and enduring learning. So take a look at yourself, figure out your triggers. Sometimes it's a boss, a spouse, even a student. Sometimes it's just how somebody says something. So take a look at yourself and figure out your triggers. What haven't I tried yet? What can I learn from this? The next thing that could be becoming important in fostering a growth mindset in ourselves and our students, and anybody else we want to carry along this journey with us, is to understand how the brain, in fact, grows. If we believe that our brains are growing and our intelligence can grow and we have a growth mindset, maybe we should understand just a little bit about what growing means when it comes to our brains. So what we're going to have next is a little tiny mini neuroscience lesson, and we'll try not to be too technical. In fact, this first slide isn't technical at all, but it's also not very accurate. This is sort of what we knew about the brain 30 years ago. And I know sometimes I think this is what my brain feels like when it's actually working. But of course, it's not really a good representation. We don't have all those, while the concept of circuits and connections is certainly not wrong, it certainly has an application, this isn't really what they look like. In fact, when we start to look at that, I can't help you with your mic. I was trying to glance at the questions here, and I'm not sure I know how to deal with that one. At any rate, when we talk about connections in the brain, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about neurons, not electrical cords, but the billions of brain cells that we have are called neurons. It's a diagram of 3 neurons. Each one has a nucleus, which that little black dot in the center of the cell body. Each one has an axon. The axon is the part of the neuron that carries chemical and electrical messages from that neuron to other neurons. Each neuron also has as many as 6,000 dendrites on its body. And the dendrites are the parts of the neuron that receive the messages. And make that connection. The connection is called a synapse. So wherever that connection takes place, there's a little synapse. But basically, one neuron sends an electrical signal down the axon, and the space between the axon and the dendrite, the synapse, into that space, the axon releases chemicals called neurotransmitters. You've probably heard of those. Things like dopamine and serotonin and other neurotransmitters. And that's how neurons communicate. They talk to each other. And as they talk to each other, really that's the basis of all human behavior. The next slide we're going to look at is an actual slide of brain tissue, enlarged many times, of course. You could fit 30,000 neurons on the head of a pin. And you can see all the little cell bodies there, the little black dots, and all that profusion of connections among those neurons. Look at all those connections. Imagine each of those neurons activating, transmitting signals electrically and with neurochemicals over and over again to activate or calm all the other neurons. Brain is a very busy place, but our brains don't start off with all those connections. Here are 2 more images of brain tissue. The one on the left is that of a newborn, and on the right is that of a 2-year-old. So at birth, the brain has approximately, in fact, all our lives, 5 billion neurons. At birth, it weighs about 1 pound. From the time that the first neurons are created in utero up to age 2, each neuron in the cortex creates about 1.8 synapses per second. That's just an enormous number of connections. And by a year, the brain has doubled its size, and by 5 or 6, it's 90% of its adult size and weight. But remember that growth doesn't have anything to do with adding more neurons. We're born pretty much with most of the neurons that we're ever going to have in our life. We do get some later. There is some neurogenesis in certain parts of our brain, but by and large, most of the neurons that we're ever going to have, we are born with. And so this growth isn't new neurons. The growth is the connections that are made in our brains between the neurons and all these neural networks while our brains are interacting with our environment. So these neurons form networks in different areas of our brain so that we can see and hear and talk and grasp and eventually ride a bike and teach and drive a car and do all the things that we've learned to do. So what these slides show very graphically is what learning looks like in the brain. This is important because the creation of connections among neurons is, in fact, learning. The brain is a learning machine. It builds itself through experience to create and strengthen the connections that are useful and used the most. And then, of course, we get rid of the ones that aren't so useful. But learning at a biological level, at a very physical way, is the creation and strengthening of connections in neural networks that activate together. When a group of neurons have activated together, it's more likely that activating one of those neurons will cause the others to activate across that neural network. And the more we activate that group of neurons, the stronger that tendency is, the stronger those connections are. This is the principle that neuroscience often refer to when they say neurons that fire together wire together. Memory, then, is the ability to reconstruct or reactivate that network. It's not a storage vault where we go and pull something out. It's actually reactivating that same network of neurons that was activated during the original learning experience. And the more we activate it, the stronger those connections get, the easier it gets to reactivate that network, and the less energy it takes. So when neurons are just learning to interact together, it takes a lot of energy. And then as it gets easier and easier and we practice more and more, it takes less and less energy. So now we want to sort of connect this into the whole concept of growth mindset and what happens in our brains when we make mistakes. We need to learn something new. So this is a model that I came up with to try to sort of depict what's going on. I'm getting distracted by the questions. They look so interesting, but I'm going to want to get through a little bit of this and then we'll come back to some of these wonderful questions. So let's say that all of these circles in the model are neurons. And let's say that the blue neurons that are connected with red lines represent a neural network that we use for some activity or thought or idea that's well learned. We've practiced this over and over again, so those connections are strong and pretty easy to activate them. Maybe it's, if I think of my son or my granddaughter's face, that will come right up because I practiced that over and over again. But the ability to learn something new involves connecting other neurons and networks to what we already know, that is, to an existing network. So what I've done is represent that here with these gray dots, these gray circles, which are neurons that aren't well connected yet. And it may be that, and that's the strength of those connections. It's not very strong yet, so that's why we have it. I made it in a green dotted line. And so that's good because, if we don't connect them exactly right the first time, we may have to practice it. We may have to connect them a little bit differently. We may have to recruit a few extra neurons. So as we practice it and get that right, then those are going to become stronger and more permanent as well. So when you make a mistake or try something new, it literally means activating a new neural network and new connections that aren't as efficient. And of course, that takes more energy. It's hard. As you might imagine, it takes energy to grow new connections. And so when it takes more energy and it's harder, that may be sometimes why we resist or have a tendency to resist learning something new or doing something new. But the good news is as we practice it, and get good at it, the thing that we're trying to do will become easier. So to illustrate that principle, here's an image. This happens to be a image of a PET scan of two brains of very similar individuals who are playing computer video games. And for those of you who don't spend, of course, I can't interpret this in detail either, but is the parts that are yellow, of course, the parts that are yellow and red are the parts that are more active at this particular time during this particular activity, while the parts that are blue and green are less active. So the parts, when we say active, what we mean is that those neurons and those parts of the brain are using more glucose. They're actually using more energy. So activity means they're using up energy, they're expending more energy to do the activity that they're doing. So given what we just talked about, and given that information about this brain scan, I'm going to tell you that one of these brains is a picture of an experienced and expert video game player, and the other one is a novice video game player. Otherwise, they're the same age, same gender, very, very similar profiles. So if you had to guess which of these brains represented that of a expert video game player, which one would you guess? Okay, someone guessed left, someone guessed right. You usually get a bunch of guesses, right. Okay. So the answer is, it is in fact the one on the right. And the principle here is maybe a little bit counterintuitive. We seem like maybe our brains would get really active when we get really good at it. But the truth is, when those connections are strong and we have a lot of experience at doing something, they're very efficient. And we can do that activity while expending less energy. It takes less energy to do something we know how to do very well than it does to try to learn something new. So the brain on the left that is all lit up with all kinds of activity is expending more energy because it's trying to learn to do something it doesn't know how to do very well. And the brain on the right is more experienced, and those neural connections and neural networks are much more efficient, and therefore the brain needs to expend less energy to do that. Now, one more little kind of brain scanning sort of thing. This is also from the work of Carol Dweck. One of the things that they decided to do once brain scans became something that were generally available is they decided to do a scan of brains with people with different mindsets and what happened when they were confronted with a mistake or an opportunity to learn. And so they found, not really surprisingly, but this is it's exciting to see it when you see the theory actually really come to life. What they found was that when someone with a fixed mindset encounters a problem or a mistake, basically it shuts down. There's not much activity. It's not trying to do anything with that mistake. So it's not active. It's not actually trying to resolve it. On the other hand, the brain of somebody with a growth mindset gets right to work on that mistake, really starts to try to figure out what to do about it. As Carol puts it, they are on fire with trying to figure out how to learn from that mistake. So what I've just tried to convey with all of this discussion is that growing our brains has a very literal meaning. It's the growth of synapses, among the neurons, among neural networks in our brains. And it turns out that having a basic understanding of this is really very helpful when it comes to fostering a growth mindset with students. And that's what we're going to tackle next. So if we really want to foster an understanding in our students and our children that mistakes are truly stepping stones to learning, what we say to them when they make mistakes is pretty darn important. So let's take a little scenario here. And as I pull up this slide, I'm also going to launch a poll so that you can all answer it. I'm going to go ahead here. Now the answers in the poll itself are just a little short. I couldn't type the whole answer, but they're pretty much the same. So the scenario is this: your child or your student or your brother or whoever it might be has gotten a C+ on a test. And so you can decide which of these statements will most effectively reinforce a growth mindset. All right, so we're getting a bunch of answers. Oh, we're over 100 answers already. This is great. And one answer is more common than the others, and then there's a second one. I'm going to give everybody just another few seconds here to be able to read the question and the answers and to choose which answer they think is the best. All right, looks like it's slowed down pretty much. Everybody's had a chance. So I'm going to close the poll, and hopefully you all can see the results. So the most common answer was answer 5. You earned a C+. What will you do differently next time? And that is, in fact, the best answer. Well, it might sound a little harsh. Maybe it could be phrased a little more gently. It's the message most likely to reinforce a growth mindset. It focuses on learning. It focuses on what can be changed to produce a different result the next time. Answer 3 is also certainly better than some of the others. And it rings a little bit of growth mindset. You have the ability, and I'm sure you'll get a better grade the next time. The problem with this one is it doesn't focus on learning. It just says, I'm sure you'll do better next time. So I do it differently, but the teacher says I'll do better next time, so therefore, hopefully I'll do better next time. The other one focuses on doing something differently, and that's one of the keys to a true growth mindset, and it's one of the things that has not always been well understood when people talk about growth mindsets. They tend to say, okay, I'm just going to encourage my students, and I know they're going to be able to do better the next time. But in fact, we have to be very specific and very strategic and very explicit about the kinds of changes and how to do things differently so that you do get a different result the next time. And of course, some of those other things we do in our misguided attempts to make our children feel better, but they're really not very effective. But these kinds of statements are very easy to make. And I can tell you that I've told my own kids when they were young how smart they were, and they were really smart. But I shouldn't then have been surprised, although we didn't know all this at that point, when sometimes they wouldn't risk things or try new things. Of course, they've all turned out very well, so I didn't ruin them anyway. But so let's think about these statements. Wow, you're so smart. You aced that test and barely studied for it. Well, as a student, I might think if I have to study hard for something, it must mean I'm not smart. Or that's okay, spelling isn't that important. Well, if it's not that important, that's the last spelling test I ever studied for, and I can't do it anyway. That teacher of yours sure picked some hard spelling words. This is when we're making an excuse and we're blaming the fault. It's the test wasn't fair. So I'm not going to change. I'm not going to try to do anything. I'm not going to learn from the experience. Or don't get down on yourself. You'll get it if you just keep trying. Well, a lot of kids who hear that will say, well, I did try and I keep trying, but I keep failing. So, who are you kidding? Anyway, and the other ones are very similar. You're a real natural. Way to go. Okay, well, if I make a mistake, or if I don't perform well, it must mean I'm not as good, I'm not as talented as they think I am. And here's a story I want to share with you. And this is actually a true story. I heard it just a few weeks ago when someone was telling me about a family that they were close to. So the parents of this family had a son who played hockey, and they were very proud of him. We all are proud of our kids, right? And really wanted to encourage him, encourage his interest in the sport. And they felt that he and his team really had a shot at winning the tournament, the championship for the league that he was in. They got all the way down to the finals, but they were defeated in the championship game. They lost that game. That their son was very upset, went home crying, just really upset. And they didn't want him to feel upset. We don't like it when our kids are upset. So these parents told their child that the outcome wasn't a reflection of how well they had played, that his team really should have won. And so what they did is they went out and bought him a trophy because they thought in their mind and his that they should think that he had really won. So what kind of message does this send? Well, you're all thinking about it, and it's of course not the kind of message we want to send. So if we don't want to send that message, what are some things that we can do? We've talked about kinds of things we shouldn't say. Now we want to talk a little bit more positively about the things that we can do proactively. So one of the things that we can do proactively is every time we're presenting something new or a skill we're going to be working on, to present it as learnable. So it's not that we're just good or bad at something. You're not going to learn it all at once. But this is something that is going to take a little work, but it's learnable. We want to convey that we value and understand what it takes to learn and to develop our abilities. So we don't expect everybody to do it right the first time. We know that there's a process, that learning is a process. We know that actually what we have to do is we have to activate those neurons over and over again with practice until we get really good at something. Convey it's not all dependent on innate talent. So whatever talent we bring, we're going to be able to develop our talents more. Giving feedback that promotes learning and trying new strategies and approaches is really important. So when we're giving feedback, for example, I teach at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. I teach it in their MBA program, a course called Strategic Thinking. And one of the things that I do is I don't actually count in the final grade their first attempts at writing the specific kind of reports that they have to write in this course. I give them a lot of feedback. These are things that they haven't done before. So if somebody happens to be really good at it right at, that's just because of their previous experience. It's not because they just, really worked harder necessarily, because they're all trying. And so what I do is give them lots of feedback and a number of attempts to rework, rewrite, and learn the process. And that's really, really critical. Making it clear that you and other adults and peers are resources for learning. So you don't have to do it all by yourself. If you need help, you should ask. You should get support. You may not be able to think of all the ideas of how to approach a difficult problem. You may need some help along the way. Own growth mindset. So when you encounter a situation that's challenging or make a mistake, we all do this, but do we say, oh, well, I just wasn't concentrating, or I wasn't thinking very hard. I wonder what I can learn from that mistake experience. And if your students and your children hear you say that, that modeling is a very helpful thing. And then finally, teaching about how the brain learns. Certainly use some of what we've talked about in the slides from this today. I also I know that children of all ages love to learn about their brains and find it endlessly fascinating. I have included within the handouts a couple of lesson plans that have been used with different age kids. One is for early childhood, even as young as kindergarten, first grade. Kids can learn things about their brains that really help support their understanding that their brains are growing based on their experiences. And the other one is for high school down to junior high, and it's a lesson plan about attention skills, so that you can even use that in 4th and 5th grade, probably. And at any rate, those are sort of some of the things that we want to make sure we're doing. And then here are some different ways of phrasing things when you have a student who makes a mistake or doesn't do well or is in any kind of or is, struggling with something. When you learn something new, it grows that part of your brain. Or that feeling of math being hard is the feeling of your brain growing. Or something like, the point is not to get it all right off the bat. The point is to build your understanding step by step. What can you try next? Well, you figured out some ways it didn't work. In fact, Thomas Edison tried 10,000 different ways, at least that's what he said he did, to design a light bulb before he actually was able to do it. So what else can we try? Or you're really making progress. I can't wait to see how you'll continue to grow your ability. All right, so that's sort of some of the things that we can do, and certainly to keep in mind when we're explicitly trying to support a growth mindset. But I want to address these two other components as well. One is cognition, the other is metacognition. So we're going to talk about cognition first, and we're going to relate this to intelligence. How effectively our brains perform cognitive skills is really what gives rise to intelligence, although there have been, and we don't have time to cover all the different theories of intelligence that exist, because there have been many different ones. And so what I have here is simply a list of various ways that in the last, 50, 60 years, people have thought about intelligence. They've thought about it as something called G, which means it's one thing. So we either have a bunch of it or not. It's not a bunch of different things. Then there were theories about different types of intelligence, fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence, which basically is the difference between problem solving and knowledge. And then people have looked at it, more about reasoning and problem solving. Or you can think of Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence, where it's a whole bunch of different things. In fact, the more people look into it, the more things it seems to be. And then even more lately, the neuroscience seems to be focusing on the ability to assemble and integrate and build multiple mental processes and use them all together to solve new challenges and to learn from them. So we really want to be aware of, and we find it helpful to think about cognition and all of the components of various mental processing skills that enter into our ability to learn. So this is a model of mental processing. It's very small on this on your screen probably. So, but I'm going to blow up different parts of it in just a minute. So you'll be able to read those parts, and of course you're going to be able to download the whole slide and be able to read it a little bit better. But basically, this just shows input on one and output on the other. So information comes in, and we do stuff with it in our brains, and then something comes out like a decision or a plan or a solution to a problem. But there's a lot that happens in between. So just to take a very high-level look at some of these things. The first thing we have to do is we have to receive that information. Information gets in through our attention filters, and our brains decide what's important enough to pay attention to in fractions of a second, thousandths of a second, and mostly at a non-conscious level. So here our attention skills, our ability to select, organize, screen out, all those kinds of things are involved in our ability to receive information. At the next stage, we actually take that information, we start to give it meaning. So we compare it to what we already know, we interpret what it is, we place it in time and space, we discern patterns, we recognize things. And again, at this stage, most of the processing is fractions of a second and still non-conscious. At the next stage, we actually become conscious. This is where the directive capacities of our mind kick in, and we start to process things at a conscious level. So, for example, we hold on to information, we think about it, we decide to do or not do something, we shift our perspective, we stop ourselves from doing things sometimes. And these skills, many of you will recognize, are very, really deal with what are now being referred to as executive functions. The ability, things like working memory, our ability to hold information in our minds, cognitive flexibility, how we shift our mindset and look at things in different ways from different perspectives. And inhibitory control is another one that's really a key. We just have to stop ourselves from doing something. So at any rate, these skills are also important in the mental, in our cognitive processing and coming up, processing information to make a decision or whatever. And so those are also part of what we can consider to be intelligence. And finally, of course, all of our processes interact with memory from short-term to long-term. Our ability to learn is our ability, again, as we said, to create those strong neural connections and those networks and be able to successfully reactivate them when we need them. And all that means, really, another way of saying that is that information is then encoded in long-term memory. So the next question is, if this is all the stuff that happens in our brains, can we really get better at it? How do we develop our intelligence? And so I want to share a little bit of some studies that have been done in which significant improvement in these cognitive skills has been experienced by a whole variety of different kinds of students. So this first study is an example of developing cognitive skills in a population of students that often don't think they can get better at them. These are students with specific learning disabilities. So by definition, they have cognitive deficits compared to their peers, and that is impairing their learning ability. And these children, even adults, I guess I should say, are so used to limits on their cognitive functioning that impede their learning ability that very often they feel defeated before they start. So this is a group of students who had fairly low cognitive functioning. You can see that when you look at this graph. If 90, a score of 90 would be considered to be normally developing. So if you took normally developing kids, they'd all be scoring about 90. And you can see that in some of these areas and some of those vital skills that we were talking about, things like working memory, visual working memory, of course, refers to our ability to hold visual information in our mind. Verbal working memory means we can hold auditory information in our mind. And things like short-term memory, attention skills. And so what the students did in this case, the SLD students were divided into two groups, a control group and a group that used BrainWare Safari, a cognitive skills development program. And if you'd like more information, we will certainly provide you with that. But the point here is that the group that were receiving their normal interventions in school, but not cognitive training, didn't really change very much. But across the board, these skills are getting much higher. In fact, in many cases, being remediated to the level of normally developing with the right kind of cognitive training. So that can have a big impact on how we learn and how we're able to tackle some of these challenging learning situations. So we might not be surprised by that, but we might also then ask the question, so what about the other end of the spectrum? What about kids who are actually, really smart already or gifted? And so this is another study that was done in a school district in South Carolina. In this school district, they use a test called the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test, to basically screen all of their students and decide to whether or not they're qualified for the gifted program. So you get a percentile score, 3 sections of the test, a verbal, a nonverbal, and a quantitative, and then you get an overall composite score. So if you score at the 96th percentile or higher on the composite, or 93rd percentile in a specific area, then you're going to qualify for the gifted program. So one year, they had nobody qualify for the gifted program, and they decided to use BrainWare to see if they could help these students qualify at a higher rate. And in fact, they did. They had many more students qualify for the gifted program the following year. And this is just an example of the students who did qualify. And you can see what we're seeing here is the two numbers refer to their age percentile rankings before and after cognitive training. So you can see, for example, this first student, SC 107, performed at 65th percentile on the nonverbal, and then afterwards, the 95th percentile. Here is a student who went from the composite 84th percentile to the 99th percentile. So this was a whole range of students, so basically all of the students in this particular school, and then there were a number of other schools that did this subsequently. And in fact, over a number of years, we collected data on thousands of students, and we're able to look at this really across the whole spectrum of abilities. So what this chart is showing is that, the other thing I really wanted to tell you is that most of those students were, it was a high poverty district. And so, you know, when you think about the impact of that on and qualifying for gifted programs and the ability to actually make a big difference there, it definitely is food for thought, I think. At any rate, so then what we did is we said, okay, we've got all these students who have taken these tests before and after BrainWare. And so we're going to want to look at the percentage of students that performed within different percentile ranges. So on the left are the students who are at the very lowest end. This is the percentage of students between the 0 and the 9th percentile. And then up at the right-hand side are the ones who performed in the very top range, the 90th percentile or higher. And you can see it for all of the students. So what you can see is that the students at the lower end, many fewer students were performing at that lower end. And at the upper end, the bars jump up, and we've got many more students performing in those upper ranges. Yes, in fact, we can have a big impact on cognitive processing and on intelligence. There's some really interesting research that was presented not very long ago by a researcher named Scott Kaufman. He's a psychologist and does a lot of work in the area of intelligence. And he basically posed the question, how many potentially gifted kids are falling through the cracks and not being identified? And the answer was a whole lot, because we really have defined giftedness a little bit wrong, but there are lots of ways to be gifted. But in the research, what it showed is that some of the best predictors of giftedness were loving work, having a purpose in life, deep thinking, tolerance of mistakes, being open to change, risk-taking. So as I read this, it's, you know, I get these wonderful echoes of growth mindset, of being willing to change, learning from our experiences, not being afraid to, you know, stand up and be counted, be it a minority of one. Because if I'm wrong, I'm going to learn from that experience. So, and being persistent, because I know that it's going to pay off. So the final thing I want to talk a little bit about is metacognition, how we think about how we think. And this is another area where there's a lot of benefit to thinking about this in terms of helping with the growth mindset. So metacognition, of course, is thinking about thinking. It's analyzing how we can learn from mistakes. So it's actually giving tools to students and to ourselves to think about these mistakes and be more effective in adapting and learning from them. Planning how to approach a learning task, you know, keeping track, monitoring our comprehension and evaluating our progress. And it also is very helpful, and an example of metacognition, when we use what we understand and know about our own cognitive abilities to work on improving them, as well as to work on how we use them in learning situations. So I wanted to share with you an example of this. This kind of thing was just not available broadly until pretty recently. This is a cognitive assessment, or comes from a cognitive assessment called Mindprint. And again, if you would like information on Mindprint, we will be happy to send some of that out. And Karen, I think, is going to maybe post a link for you, so with some more information right away. At any rate, this is a cognitive assessment that can be used in a school. It can be used at home. It's used by clinicians. So it's a very broad application. And what comes out of it is essentially a learning profile. So what you'll do is see the areas where the person who took the assessment, what skills that they need to support, what skills are their strengths, and then you can see a bunch of skills here in the expected range, but some might be in the low, some might be medium, some might be high. And there's just a lot of wonderful information that can come out of this. So for example, we can see that this student has very strong visual memory, and not as strong, it's only right in the middle of the expected range, verbal memory. So this student is going to be able to remember visual information much easier than verbal. Did I say the wrong thing? Visual information would be able to be remembered better than, more efficiently than verbal memory. So this suggests some wonderful things for this the student and their approach to their work. So what we can do, and again, I want to just want to say there's a lot of words on these slides, and typically you don't put a lot of words on PowerPoint slides, but I wanted you to have this information when you went away with it. So for example, we always like to start with strengths. So this student has really good complex reasoning abilities. And so we want to leverage that. We want to give him authentic opportunities to use those skills, to apply them. He's got very strong visual memory. And so what we can suggest about that is that he's going to be good at remembering information from charts and graphs, maybe not as strong on the verbal memory side. So we can use that strong visual memory to give him tools and strategies to be more efficient in his learning. So visualizing, drawing a picture, creating a mind map, for example, even doing visual note-taking could be good options for this student, because we know that that visual information is going to be easier and more effectively remembered by him, and then allow him to connect it to the verbal information. Then we can switch around, and then we can look at the skills where the student needs some support. So flexible thinking actually was not really low for this student. He was in the middle of the range. But when you have a student with average flexible thinking skills and very strong reasoning skills, then you might want to stay aware of the potential that this student, when he's in a challenging situation or learning something new, might not do as well as in very comfortable, previously experienced problem-solving situations. So coaching him on how to generate different alternatives, coaching him on how to recognize his response when he encounters a novel learning situation or a challenging situation can be helpful. And having experiences, strategies in place can be very helpful in dealing with that. This student, I should also note, the very low attention skills. And we happen to know that this student also had an ADHD diagnosis. I want to clarify that Mindprint does not generate a diagnosis, but the student's performance on this test is very consistent with that diagnosis, of course. So when we really want to get growth mindset and really want to use what we know about it to improve our own abilities as well as to work with our students and our kids, we just need to remember a few things, I think. Our blend of mindsets evolves over time. We need to work on it. It's a journey, not a place. We're all works in progress. When you hear it's the effort, not the outcome, beware. This is one of the misconceptions that has become rather prominent in people who taught growth mindset in schools sometimes. It's not just about grit or perseverance or stick-to-itiveness. It is about smart practice. It's about, when you're practicing the piano, you don't play your piece from the beginning to the end when you're struggling with parts of it. You want to play those parts that are more challenging and focus on them. So, you want different strategies. You want to get help and support from peers. It's not just about doing the same old thing again. You want to figure out how to be more effective and provide a better solution to whatever it is you were struggling with. And it is also the outcome. Don't tell kids or anybody else that they did well when they didn't. That is not helping them. Helping them understand where they are, because if you remember that it's a learning process, and that we're not all going to be really good at it right off the bat. In fact, most of us are not going to be really good at something right off the bat. If you think about rubrics that are expressly focused on evolving capabilities, where you don't have very much of it, but then it starts to emerge, and then you become proficient, and then you become exemplary. If you really convey to students where they are on this track, and help them think about strategies and ways to get better, then that's really useful for them in understanding. And then the outcome really means something, and they're able to judge it much more for themselves. So don't just espouse a growth mindset. We have to have policies and development opportunities and feedback opportunities, very specific feedback that helps someone figure out what they need to do differently the next time is going to be terribly important. So this is a very fun video that you can share with your students if they want to have proof that maybe everybody that they think is very talented didn't necessarily have all that talent at the beginning. Someone told me I said Michael Jackson instead of Michael Jordan this morning in the video, so I want to clarify that I do know the difference. But this is, and there are a number of other examples. This is called Famous Failures, and it's easy to find on YouTube. In fact, I will type that. I meant to get that link, and I didn't do it, but Famous Failures. And we'll send a link to the video on YouTube out when we send a follow-up email, so I'll make sure everybody does get that. All right, so I'm going to track back and see. Oh yes, Amelia's talking about the zone of proximal development. We want to be working where we're almost beyond our current capability, so we're always pushing that that boundary. So please go ahead and okay, so James asked about strategies for helping students change from fixed mindset to growth mindset. I think that there are a number of the things that we talked about today. Modeling yourself, of course, is very, very important. And Carol Dweck and others have done research that shows that that's a key element in it. I think teaching students about their brains, I think making it very, and how they grow is very, a very important part of it and can be very helpful. And then when they're getting feedback or where they're in a situation, trying to make them aware that of the learning process as a process, and that it's not going to all happen at once. And, it's giving examples of, that video can be very helpful as well, of examples of people like Michael Jordan. And there are a bunch of them. I really enjoyed watching it and trying to guess who the person was from the description of what they're. Okay, Karen, did you put the Mindprint link in there? Somebody asked about recording. We are recording the webinar. It will be posted later today or tomorrow, and you will automatically get an email when it's posted. Yeah, Beth makes some very relevant comments about gifted programs, and personally, I think that we all have gifts that should be treasured and developed, and it's really more about personalizing and individualizing than about carving off a group to get different education. All right, I'm going to go back and see if there are any other questions that I can get. Oops, it's bouncing around. Yeah, well, I think that, you know, I know a number of schools right now who are working on growth mindset, and often they have somebody come in and work with them. Often what they do is they have a group of teachers who are interested in it, who want to delve into Carol Dweck's work and some of what's been written about it, and then bring it back to other teachers and start some discussion. It's very hard to tell somebody that they really don't have a fixed mindset. They sort of have to discover it for themselves if they're pretty far down on that. But I do this with my MBA students, where I have them take that mindset quiz at the first day of class, and we talk about what it means. And it's not, you know, it's not bad to one thing or the other. It's what's important is to understand sort of where you are and where you are on that track of developing. I mean, I think that's really sort of the whole message here. All right, well, we are at our stopping time, and I know everybody has lots and lots of things to do. I want to make sure that you have my contact information. So this is my favorite picture of a synapse, and which represents connections. And you have my email and phone number. If you are active on LinkedIn and would like to connect there, I would be delighted to do that. And then you have, if you hang it on Facebook or want to check out our website, you've got that information as well. So let's keep the conversation going. I'm sure we didn't get to everything, to all the questions today. We will look forward to continuing the discussion and connecting with you as we go forward. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day, week, and again, we will look forward to staying in touch and wish you all the best.